Hello! So I guess YouTube might know my obsession with boba, but it's been recommending me how to make boba from scratch videos non-stop. And boba is definitely one of my favorite things, but whenever I try to make boba at home using the pre-packaged boba, I'm always a little bit disappointed with the pearls and how maybe the flavor is weird or the texture isn't right. So I thought this would be a great chance for me to try to make it myself. So this week I set out to find the ultimate boba recipe. So in this video, I'm going to try kind of like a basic recipe and try 2 modifications and kind of compare and contrast the taste and see which one is better. Also, side note, brown sugar is now a coveted ingredient. So due to the quarantine and kind of limiting how often I go out, and since apparently also every single person on the planet is trying to bake, it took me 3 full weeks to find brown sugar anywhere in stock. So yeah, I tried very hard for this, so hope you enjoy. First, I needed to find this basic recipe for boba, and I broke out my handy dandy Google Sheets. So I found a bunch of recipes on different blogs and YouTube videos, and I compared them side by side. They all had the same 3 ingredients, and I wrote down the amount in grams. I then scaled them to have an equal amount of tapioca, and I realized that all the recipes had pretty much 3 parts tapioca to 2 parts water, and then the sugared content varied a little bit. I scaled down the recipe again to make smaller servings since I didn't want 20 cups of boba, and I decided to use 15 grams of sugar for a nice even number. So, on to the recipe. Just kidding! Honestly, it turned out rather poorly, so this is just a highlight reel of everything that went wrong. I somehow kept measuring my ingredients incorrectly and had to keep readjusting, and a tragedy struck. And in this moment, I realized I was a disaster. After changing into a white shirt to minimize future damage, I rolled the dough into balls and I thought it looks pretty good. However, it managed to morph into an abstract interpretation of the asteroid belt. So yeah, I wasn't super happy with how this turned out. I also undercooked it just because I was in the middle of filming myself and then my roommates walked in and I felt really embarrassed because it was clearly not going well, and I don't know, I just felt like I was being judged. So I took it out really soon, so when I ate it, it was still pretty starchy on the inside and the texture was definitely not good. The brown sugar mixture on the outside of the glass was also a little bit too thin, so it just slid off, and this shot is not very aesthetic. So all in all, I was pretty disappointed with the results, and after all this, I felt pretty tired. So I took a break and decided to come back to it tomorrow and hopefully it'll be better. So we'll just pretend that first attempt never happened and start from the beginning. To make boba, we'll need to measure out 15 grams of dark brown sugar and 20 grams of water in a saucepan. If your scale sucks as much as mine, be very patient when you're measuring out because the numbers may take 10 seconds each to update. It's fine. We'll also want to measure out 30 grams of tapioca flour in a separate bowl. Next, we're going to heat the sugar mixture over the stove until it starts bubbling. Then turn off the heat and add a spoonful of tapioca flour and mix to combine. Somehow mine was chunky, even though this literally never happened in a single one of the videos I watched. I guess they are just professionals. Anyway, after it's more or less incorporated, turn the heat back on and stir it until it becomes thick and gooey. Next, we're going to add the rest of the tapioca flour and stir until it's just barely incorporated. And now it's time to roll out this dough. So sprinkle a flat surface with some more tapioca to prevent stickiness and dump out everything in your pan. Like many things in life, just work with it until it comes together. This requires a good amount of pleading with the dough and having a lot of faith. Eventually, when it's Play-Doh consistency, roll it out into snakes. you'll want to cut the snakes into little snake chunks and then roll them into little snake balls. And here's a nice shot of me doing everything again from a different angle, so you can see it in better detail. Eventually, you should have a nice ball pit of tapioca ready to go. Add them to a large pot of boiling water and stir until they start floating to the surface. Then cover it with the lid and cook for 15 minutes on low heat before turning off the heat and letting it sit in this hot water without taking the lid off for an additional 10 minutes. And now your boba is completely cooked. The last step is to coat the boba in sugar. Add as much brown sugar as you feel comfortable eating into a saucepan, and then just a little bit of water to prevent burning. And once this starts simmering, add your cooked boba. Wait until it gets ooey gooey, caramelly, and serve. And this is definitely the most exciting part of putting everything together. So add the boba to the glass and swirl it around the cup for that tigery sugar look, and bam! I ran out of milk at the top, but just use your imagination. Yeah, overall I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. So I did notice when I first added the tapioca there were some lumps, but I don't think that affected the end result too much. The flavor was pretty good and I was pretty happy with it. So yeah, so now this was the basic recipe done and I wanted to see if there were any modifications I could do to improve the flavor. So what is there to improve about the original recipe? So in the past few days I've been reading a lot about sugar, and so I think the original recipe in Taiwan calls for black sugar, which is kind of unrefined sugar, and a lot of the recipes in the States substitute brown sugar, which is actually just refined cane sugar, like the white sugar that you see, and they add molasses back into it to have kind of the unrefined taste. I was curious if adding black sugar rather than brown sugar would change the taste. Now, finding black sugar is also really hard. So I went to the Chinese grocery store and I picked up this bag of black sugar, and I was pretty happy with it. I was like, oh, this is made in Taiwan, it's probably legit. But then after I got home, I noticed that on the back the ingredients said it was made with cane sugar and molasses, which makes me think that maybe this is just like the original sugar and they added molasses back into it, similar to how they make brown sugar in the US. So I was not convinced. Also on the back of this, it says that there are 33 cups in here. So maybe this is just sketchy. I don't know. So I decided to look again. And then this time I found this sugar. Sorry, I took it out of the packaging, but it's called black slab sugar. And it comes in these like long chunks, and the only ingredient in the back just said this was cane sugar and water, and it looked dark, so I was convinced that maybe this is right. If someone knows that this is actually black sugar, let me know, but it looks unrefined to me. This recipe is exactly the same as the previous one, except I substituted the brown sugar for the black sugar bars. So easy peasy, right? No. The black sugar was really hard to work with since the only way to break it apart was to whack it with the cleaver, and because it was in a big chunk, I was worried it would burn and made the fatal mistake of adding more water. This meant that when I added all of my tapioca starch, I actually ended up making tapioca soup. So the only thing I could possibly do was add more starch, so I just prayed to the boba gods and went for it. The dough consistency kept yo-yoing between too dry and too wet, and I never really got it quite right. The problem is if the dough is too dry, it's really hard to roll out, and if it's too wet, it won't hold its shape and will instead turn into nice boba slime. So after a ridiculous amount of work, I managed to salvage the situation to make this nice cup of pearls, and the final drink was pretty good. I also rewarded myself for persevering through the setbacks caused by my own incompetence, eating a bunch of tapioca straight out of a bowl. So, honestly, this is not bad considering I more or less eyeballed the whole thing. The taste was definitely much lighter than the previous versions since my ratio of sugar was definitely a lot smaller since I added so much additional water and tapioca. But overall, I think I actually liked it a little more. I found the original boba to be a little bit too sweet, so I thought this was perfect. The taste did taste a little bit different than the brown sugar, and it's really hard to describe taste. but it felt a little bit less kind of in-your-face molasses flavor, and I had a little bit more, I don't know, other flavors. So all throughout this process, I noticed that the color of the boba was very light and transparent, and that's very different than most boba I see in stores. I imagined that maybe the store-bought ones have food coloring, but I didn't really want to do that. And I saw a lot of videos on YouTube having people put cocoa powder to try to darken the color, and I thought that was a really cool idea, and I was curious if that would affect the flavor at all. This is also exactly the same as the basic recipe, except I substituted a few grams of tapioca flour with cocoa powder. And we all know fourth time's the charm, right? No, it is not. I think I managed to completely cook the dough on the stove, so by the time I worked with it, it had a very, very elastic consistency. You can see here that I needed a lot of force, and it looked more poo than food. After almost 20 minutes, I finally got it to be somewhat smooth, but it was basically impossible to roll or to shape, so I just cut them into little poo chunks. I didn't film the cooking process because I was too depressed, but I do think that I overcooked it with the original 15-minute time, since it was probably already cooked, so it was more soggy than I would have liked. Is it impossible to make boba properly? Oh, today we learned that following instructions is hard. I don't understand how this is my fourth time trying it and yet there's still something that went wrong, but that's how it is, I guess. So as soon as I started squishing it, it just immediately felt wrong, and like it was super elastic, but not in like a good way. It felt like if I snapped it in half, I would never be able to assemble it again. As for the flavor, I think the cocoa powder definitely adds a little bit of bitterness. So if you don't like the chocolate flavor, maybe it's good to kind of cut back on the cocoa powder and just be okay with a little bit of lighter color. Although I personally thought that the chocolate and caramel works really well together, so for my drink I was good with it. So yeah, after all of these rounds of making boba, I wanted to have one last go to try to work out any kinks and see if I could get the perfect cup of boba. So here we go. And now we're coming around to Lily's final round of boba making. She seems to have settled on a final recipe, which includes elements from all of her previous trials. There's brown sugar and cocoa powder in the dough, and a final caramel coating made with black sugar. Lily has been very careful with her ingredients so far, but we know any mistake could be fatal. Now, we know that Lily has had some difficulty with the consistency of the dough in the past, so this is a crucial step to get right. But she seems to have made it through. The dough has a beautiful color and great consistency. If she is able to pull this off, this will be a huge victory for the boba fanatic. She is definitely a bit slow with the rolling, and it will be a race against time to see if she can finish before the dough dries out. And she made it! The final appearance of the tapioca balls does look promising, but will the rest of the drink go according to plan? Here she is caramelizing her black sugar with the cooked boba onto the final step of assembling her drink. And oh, it does look beautiful. Look at that delicious caramel cascading down the sides of the glass. I can only imagine how delicious this tastes. This is the final product, and I'm really happy with how it looks, but the most important part, the taste test. The texture of the boba is really chewy, but not, overly starchy. It has really good caramel flavor, and most of all, the pearls look black, so the aesthetic is really nice, and it's not too sweet. This is definitely the best one I've made so far, by far. So yeah, thank you so much for following along as I try to make the perfect cup of boba. I'm gonna go eat some more of this now, so thanks for watching. Bye!